Hello lovelies, welcome again to the channel. So the style inspiration for today's tutorial is this dress with a bustier top and a twisted or knotted skirt detail. So I made this for an event I attended recently. If you want to see how the whole look came together, definitely do watch to the end. Starting with my basic bodice block, I'm going to first turn that into a dress block. So here are the following measurements I'll be using. To make a dress block, I'm going to extend the length from the hip all the way to the bottom of the paper. Now after marking the first line, I'm going to measure the width of the hip on the back part of the pattern and then take that same measurement to the bottom of the paper, mark and then connect back to the hip point. And I'm just going to repeat the same process to the other side, which is the center front. After extending the length from the hip line, I'm going to mark the actual length by measuring from the neck point to the bottom of the paper. So in this case, my actual length was 61 inches and the length of this paper was 44 inches. So I'll be deducting 44 from 61 inches, which is going to be left with 17 inches. So this bodice block I'm using already does have an even seam allowance of 1 inch. To shape the knee area, I'm going to measure from the waistline the knee length. In this case, for the knee length, I'm going to use 20 inches. Now from that point, I'm going to measure from the hip line to the knee point and then take that same measurement to the center front so that I have a straight line. The waist and knee measurement can start at about 16 inches and go all the way to about 20 to 21 or even 22 inches based on how tall you are. And you can also base this on your style preference. Next, I'm just going to connect those points that I've marked, and then from there, I can now shape in the knee. So here, I'm using 1 inch on the side seam. Towards the center back, I'm using 1.5 inch. Also, this can be shaped based on how tightly you want it to fit around the knee. From this last point, I'm just going to connect back to the hip line, and then from there to the bottom. So I did go ahead to make an extra copy of the skirt part of the front, which I traced on fold. This is the one I'll be using for the knotted or the twisted detail on the skirt. So moving on to the bustier part of the design, the first thing I'm going to do is to lower the armhole by bringing it down 1/2 inch on both the back and the front. For the neckline at the back, I wanted the curve to go a little higher above the back line instead of dropping it below the back line. On the front of my pattern, I'm going to mark my point X, which is usually on the true bust line between the shoulder dot and the waist dot. So next I'm going to connect those 2 points and then from there mark the shoulder to underbust length. Now in this case, the shoulder to underbust length was 14.25 inch. So from the neck point, I'm going to mark 14.25 inch, draw a short line across, and from there I can then shape the underbust. Here I use 2 cm, which is the same as 1/4 inch. Now this measurement does vary based on the bust size. You can start this measurement from about 1 cm to about 3 cm. On the side of the front, I'm going to mark 3 inches below the waistline. And on the front, I'm going to mark 4.5 inch below the waistline. After marking those points, I'm just going to go ahead and connect. So the bustier length is dipping below the waistline because of the detail on the knotted skirt. Here I'm just making sure that the lines do connect by folding my dot. Moving on to the waistline, I'm going to take 1 cm on both sides of the dot just for an extra cinch in at the waist. Now this is not a corset back bustier. It's going to have a regular zipper, but I still wanted that illusion of a cinched waistline. Now when you're doing something like this, just make sure whatever zipper you're using is super strong and durable to hold up. Now on the dot below the waistline along the hem, I'm going to shape that out with 0.5 cm on both sides, but I'll be adding that measurement back to the side of the pattern. So in context, I want the dot line to have a flat finish, but also maintaining the same width along the hemline of the bustier. So here I'm just going to connect that new side seam and then finish off by connecting the points along my bust curve. So first I'm going to connect the underbust to the waistline and then back to the hem of the bustier, and then finish off with my French curve along the fullest part of my bust. So before I get to marking the neckline of the bustier, I'm going to go ahead and just cut out my pattern pieces. So here I'm going to cut out the newly marked dots so I can easily close my shoulder darts to allow me to draw the neckline for the front. For the neck depth, I'm going to measure from the base of the neck. In this case, I'll be using 6 inches. Now moving to the armhole, I'm going to measure how low I want the neckline to sit on that side. So here I'm going to use 5 inches, and from that point, I'm going to mark 1 inch towards the CF. Now this point is basically just to move the armhole of the bustier further out. From that point, I'm going to draw the neckline using my French curve, and from that last point, connect back to the armhole, like so. So I ended up moving the neckline towards the side of the armhole a little higher with just about ½ an inch, and I just basically reconnected. So here I'm just cutting out my pattern through the new neckline. I wanted 3 panel lines on the front of the bustier. For the center panel, I wanted it slanted as opposed to using the original panel line. So after closing out the original panel, I'm just going to mark from the underbust and basically draw my style line from there. Next, I'm going to cut through this new point and then separate my pattern pieces. For the next panel line, I'm going to mark from around the mid armhole and then just basically draw my line to the bottom of the bustier. So here I didn't use a specific width, but as a guide you can use about 1.5 to 2 inches measuring from the waistline on the first panel. After cutting out my panel lines, I'm just going to go ahead and rebuild them. And also marking out the point where I'll be adding my seam allowance. So there will be seam allowance all around except the center front, which is going to be cut and fold, and the side seam, which already has a seam allowance of 1 inch. So before marking out the panel lines on the back part of the bustier, I went ahead to cut that on lining. For the panel line on the back, I'm just going to extend the dart all the way up onto the neckline. For the second panel line, I'm going to measure 1.5 inch from the dart and then just draw up onto the neckline, just like the first panel. Again, I'm going to level out my panel pieces and basically just mark the points where I'll be adding my seam allowance. So here on the center back, I'll be adding 2 inches for my zip allowance and ½ inch on all other sides except the side seam. So if you've made it this far, thank you for sticking around. Please go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. It does go a long way. It just lets me know you love this content and you'd like me to make more stuff like this. This is also a way of supporting this channel. With your likes, your comments, and your shares, they really do go a long way. So if you're new to this channel and you like contents like this, please consider subscribing. And if you're already subscribed, thank you so much. Now moving on to the twisted or knotted skirt. Here I have already traced out my front skirt pattern on fold. So this is the full piece. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to mark the point where I want my slit to be at. Now I usually mark the slit along the dot line. So here my slit was on the right side. Next I'm going to mark the point where I want my knots to be at. Now I'm going to do this right at the end of the dot on the slit line. From this point, I'm going to rule a line across, reaching both sides of the skirt. This is the point where I'll be drawing my slash lines and where the fullness will be added for the ruching or the gathered effect. So before I start marking my slash lines, I'm going to close the second dart on the waist. Next, I'm going to start marking out my slash lines based on the direction I want my ruching to be at. Now you can slash to however length you want and as many slash as you want. The more slashes you make, the fuller the gathered detail or the ruching will be. So here I didn't make as much as I wanted to because I was working with just 2 yards of fabric. So I wanted to be sure not to make too many slashes so that I don't run out of fabric. Now you want to make sure the number of slashes are equal on both sides. So if you're making 10 slashes on the right side, make sure there are also 10 slashes on the left side. Now as you see here, it's important for all your slash lines to meet at a single point, which is just below the dot point. Make sure they're all connecting at that point. Another thing to note, if you're having 3 slashes above the line on the dot point, make sure they're equal on both sides. Now once my slashes are done, I'm going to properly label the skirt pattern. I'm going to mark the sides that goes up, which is the waistline. I'm going to label the sides and also label the slit line, because when you open the slashes and spread it out on paper, it does get confusing. So please make sure to properly label so that you know where each of these points are. So a side note, I didn't want the waistline of the skirt to be as slanted as the original design, hence why my waistline is still straight. But if you want a slanted waistline effect, then definitely do slant the waistline along the dot point before marking the slashes. So here I've separated both pieces through the slit line. Next I'm going to open out my slash lines and spread on a separate piece of paper. So here I have my extra piece of paper. Now I didn't use a specific width or length. I just made sure it was wide enough to accommodate how wide I wanted to spread the slashes. Next I'm going to mark the center line of that paper. So here I'll be starting with the right side of the skirt, which is the smaller piece. So I'm going to lay it out, and then the first 3 slashes I'm going to cut. Now this was the point where the slashes met, the slash point. Now after cutting through that line, I'm going to flip it upside down so that they stand side by side like so. Now you want to make sure the first points are almost touching. That will be the starting point. The first points have to touch, and then the other slashes you can then spread as wide as you want. Now because the other piece on the opposite side of the paper is not as big as the other, you want to make sure when you're spreading, you don't spread them too different. Like make sure their spreading is matching each other. Like don't spread one way more than the other. Just also make sure you're able to easily connect from the waistline on the opposite side to the other last point of the slash. Now if at that point you find it difficult to connect, then you can just basically adjust your slashes to match to make sure that they connect seamlessly. So once I'm okay with the slashes I've made, I'm just going to use my French curve and connect from the opposite side from the waist and then to meet the last point of the other slash. And I'll just repeat the same to the other side where the first slashes met. Again, you want to make sure you properly label the pattern to eliminate any confusion. So another side note, the center of the line that we marked on the brown piece of paper is going to be the fold line for the pattern. So here is an idea of how that is going to fold. So the opposite side is going to roll over and then form the side seam. So next we're going to be moving to the left side of the skirt, which has the bigger piece. Again, the same rules apply. The first 3 slashes is where we're going to cut. So once I cut, flip it upside down to the opposite side of the center line on the brown paper. And basically just spread as I did in the last and same. Again, here's an idea of how the other side looks. Basically, the opposite side rolls over to the side seam. So this is what my final pattern pieces looks like. So here, still making sure to properly label so there's no mix up when I'm cutting. I also went ahead to measure the length along the slit line just to make sure it aligns. Now before cutting out on my actual fabric, I'm going to make a toile of this pattern just to check the fit and see if everything checks out right. Also make sure to place on the right grain. Here I am cutting on the straight grain, but the other side will appear unbiased because of how the pattern is made. I made sure to add half-inch seam allowance on all sides of the pattern. And I cannot stress this enough, always notch to know your points, notch to mark your points so you do not make mistakes when you're sewing your pattern pieces. So for the bigger piece, I'm going to fold it along that center line, just around the notched area on the top, and then I'm going to leave about 2 inches gap and then sew out the rest of the seam to the side, like so. Here's what it looks like with the seams already done. Now the smaller piece is going to go in between the little gap that I left, and then I'm also going to sew it on the other side after passing through. So first of all, pass it through the 2-inch gap. If you want the waistline to slant a little more along this knot or the slit line, now what you can do is fold that portion at the point where the arrow is pointing. Literally just fold it in a slanted form on both the left and on the right side around the knotted point, and then that way the waist is more slanted. Then flip it on the wrong side and also sew a 1/2-inch seam. Now make sure you sew as close to the first knot as possible, or you don't want to see any holes after you sew out the seam on that line. So at this point all my seams was done, and I also ran a stitch along the top line right on top of the waist. Just at that point where I previously explained, you can either fold it down for a more slanted waistline. Overall, I think it turned out okay. The only thing I wish was that I had more fabric to work with. So after the test fit, I went ahead and cut these same pieces on my actual fabric. So what I did in this case was I added a lining to this because I wanted to face along the slit line. So here I've already cut out my satin lining and marked all my points, and next I'm just going to go ahead and turn only the part where the slit line is on. Here I'm basically just pinning out the part where I'll be sewing 1/2 inch to face along the slit line. Now at this point I've gone ahead to attach the lining to also face along the slit line, and I repeat the same process on how I did the toile. First leave a gap and then sew the remaining seam with 1/2 inch. Again, this is the point where you can fold down for a more slanted waistline, but instead I'm sewing mine with 1/2 inch because I wanted mine higher up on the waist instead of slanted as the original design. So here's what it looks like with all the sides sewn. So here I did have to close up the slit a little bit because it was just too high up for me, so I did pin the points where I wanted my slit to end. Moving on to the bustier. Here I've already cut out my pattern pieces on the fabric. So this fabric was super lightweight. It's a lining grade taffeta. So what I did for the interfacing, I used shape flex directly on the fabric, and then I layered it with weft interfacing, which is also known as the hairstay. Next, I'm going to just pin my fabric pieces together and sew that down with 1/2 inch. Now for the back part, I first cut the lining before I then cut out the panel pieces on the actual fabric. So here the lining is whole, but the actual fabric is in panels. I'm just going to pin them in place and sew out 1/2 inch as well. Also, I did put a layer of interfacing on the lining, but this one was super lightweight. It's like a knit lining. It does stretch, but once you put it on a straight grain fabric, it stays as well. So I used the original panel lines for the lining of the bustier. I didn't want the slanted line because of the boning I was going to attach. So here's what the front and the back of the bustier looks like after joining the seams. At this point, I've gone ahead to iron out my seams flat. And here's a little up close to show you how I top stitched the panel lines. Next, I'm going to be attaching the boning on the lining. I didn't use as much boning because this is not a corset. I just wanted it to be able to hold up because of the neckline on the bustier. And once my bonings were in, I attached a breast pad on the bust line, just for extra support in case I didn't want to wear this with a bra. Also on the back part of the bustier, I've gone ahead to join the panel pieces for the back and also attach the boning to the lining. Because the neckline for this bustier was slightly gaped, I went ahead to add a layer of horsehair braid to the neckline. This will just further support it so that the neckline doesn't dip in when it's worn. But in the case where you use very thick layer of interfacing, you don't have to add the horsehair braids. But sometimes I just like to do it because I like the firmness it gives around the neckline. So at this point, the neckline and the armhole and also the hemline of the bustier is all turned. Next is to attach the skirt part to the bustier. So I'm going to move the skirt up to the waistline of the bustier and just pin in place, and also run a stitch to hold that point down. Next, I'm going to join the skirt part of the dress to the back of the bustier by pinning the fabric to fabric and the lining to the lining, and then basically sewing with 1/2 inch. So after stitching, I went ahead to attach the sides, install my zipper, and here is me checking out the fit. So far, I like the fit on the bustier. Now, I don't know if I mentioned, but the neckline of the bustier is meant to be slightly gaped. It's not meant to be fitted around the chest, and that's why I didn't shape the overbust when I was making the pattern. For the skirt part, I had to take about 1 inch on both sides, because I did add another 1/2 inch on the side seams when I was cutting the pattern out. For the first fit, I think it turned out great. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Was this okay? What would you have changed in your case? And let me know in the comments, guys. This was me on the day of the event. I did end up making an off-shoulder mesh top to wear underneath because I definitely will not be wearing a strapless dress. Also, I got the little cinch on the waistline, which I love. If you found any part of this tutorial helpful, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on your notification bell so you never miss a video from me. And here's just a few pictures from the event. So this is officially the end of this tutorial. I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye, and thank you so much for watching.